I thought this started at 6, so I'm on my 5th beer. So forgive me. Um, let's see. The city of Tacoma v. Andrews, Tacoma's battle to end federal recognition for the Puyallup tribe. I don't know what I did now. No.
Yeah, you should be able to. What happened?
Now we have to go back to slideshow.
Yeah. So
Yes. Okay. So when I first took the position at UW Tacoma, my dad told me that there's two research things he wanted me to look at. Those two things were the Executive Order of 1857, and the other one was the Andrews v. the City of Tacoma. And so this talk is really going to focus on Andrews versus the City of Tacoma, but also is going to intertwine it with the Executive Order of 1857. I keep doing that and I'm not supposed to, am I? I'm sorry. I don't understand. I'm a Mac person. Now we're going to. Okay, this thing.
Yep.
Okay, so the Puyallup tribe today, I'm assuming if you're here, you're pretty aware of the Puyallup tribe. They're an economic powerhouse. They, one of the, I think the 4th largest employer in Pierce County. They enjoy extremely good relationships, both at the national level, the state level, and of course, at the city level. I think I've all seen these signs right around town. This roughly translates as "I love Indian gambling," but that's a joke. But and so I'm here to really just disabuse this notion, right, of the city of Tacoma as somebody who has been supportive and in partnership with the Puyallup tribe. This is a very recent phenomenon, and it's basically based on the Puyallup tribe's economic their economic power that they hold now, right? So let's bring it back to. So this is a weird old map I have that is of the Puyallup tribe's original, what we considered our original land base. And you can see that it includes Mount Rainier, or Tacoma, as we would call it, which is more or less the Puyallup watershed. And that little orange bit is what's going to be the Puyallup Reservation after the Medicine Creek Treaty. Here is the introduction to the Medicine Creek Treaty. That's the treaty that we signed in 1855, 1854, 1855 to that where we lost, most of our ancestral land base. For those of you, I don't know if you're aware, but right now the Medicine Creek Treaty is actually at the Washington State History Museum right now. It arrived, it was open to tribal leaders on Friday night, and now will be, I think, there until like July. So I really suggest you all go see this. Yeah, the next one. This is actually High 10 is my ancestor that signed the Medicine Creek Treaty. I'm pretty excited to show that. So the Executive Order of 1857 was in direct result of the treaty wars that happened right after the signing of the Medicine Creek Treaty. So the treaty wars, for those of you that are unfamiliar, were mainly led by Chief Leshai, his brother, and other Nisqually and Puyallup warriors who fought against the unfair reservation boundaries that the Medicine Creek Treaty imposed on our people. And this executive order enlarged our reservation and really enlarged the Nisqually, who's as unfair as it was to the Puyallup. It was deeply, deeply unfair to the Nisqually. And so this was done by executive order, and this basically just enlarged it a little bit for the Puyallup, but it's going to have major consequences in the and about 100 years later. And so this is the Puyallup Reservation after it's been allotted, which is, so the Dawes Act of 1887 is where, or the General Allotment Act, some of you are probably very familiar and some of you have no idea what this means, but basically it's where they take, the US government took communally owned reservation land and divided it into individual allotments, sort of under the pretense that that Native nations needed to be individual landowners. So each of these allotments would go to a head of family. Of course, this would have to be male under the US government. And then they would be sort of turned into proper American individuals who would start farming. It's ridiculous. But the important point and why they did it was not necessarily to make proper Americans out of indigenous peoples, but really because once you have it parceled out like this, it becomes much, much easier to sell, right? Which is what's going to happen here. Sorry. And if we look here, I can't see it well enough, but this is going to be right over there. Is my family allotment that is going to be allotted to us in 1890. Which so comes to me here and my grandma. And so Hashfakil, Tsitsi Ab, Danica Sarah Miller, Tsitsta Spiala Peshched, Tsi Ab Bill Sterud, Tsitsta E Debad Spiala Bash, Carl William Sterud, E Tutsapa, Hidatsabush, Marjorie Matheson Sterud, Tsitsta E Tudkaya, Spiala Bash, Tuthateeth Young, Siaya. So I'm Danica Sterud Miller. I am a citizen of Puyallup Nation. My dad is Bill Sterud. My grandpa is Carl William Sterud. He's Hidatsa. And my grandma, who's pictured here, is Marjorie Matheson Sterud, who is Puyallup. So this talk is a little bit of this very long work on this city of Tacoma v. Andrews. And when I was preparing this presentation for another talk, I was really just called to make this about my grandma. And this is like a paragraph of this whole like article, but the rest of the talk is really just going to be about my grandma. And there's in Vine Deloria's Custer Died for Your Sins. I think it's in that one. He talks a lot about sort of the, like the American settler trope of, my grandma was a Cherokee princess, that sort of thing, right? This sort of way of claiming an indigeneity and this right to the land that settlers don't really have. And he said, he says there though that like the greatest thing actually is like having like a Native grandma. And I just think that's so wonderful, right? If only, right, that we could all have Native grandmas. And what's awesome here is that my grandma would make us matching powwow dresses every year. So here I am like 4 years old and I would say like well into her 60s. And she was like, no, like here's our matching powwow dresses. And every year we would have our matching powwow dresses. So let's see. And this is my grandma, about a year younger or two than me here. I'm sorry, I pointed to my own screen. Two brothers and then her parents, or my great grandparents. And this is her. I think it's a little bit later than this when this picture was taken. But in 1936, we have the Indian Reorganization Act. And what the Indian Reorganization Act does is it's going to repeal the Dawes Act. The Dawes Act, or the General Allotment Act, which is again what divided the reservation up into allotments. This was all over the now United States. So this is not just unique to Puyallup. But the Indian Reorganization Act really recognizes that finally, I mean, it took like 50 years, that under the Dawes Act, we lost about 90% of our land base, with about 10% of that that it was left over being mostly desert or really land basically that settlers didn't want. And that's going to be nationally, but also for the Puyallup specifically, our land loss, we're going to lose most of our land base, like 95% of it, between about 1905 to 1920. It's going to be so bad, and the land loss is going to be so quick, and through like illegal transfer of land titles. But the federal government doesn't exactly, kind of steps in and says something along the lines of, that was really bad. You can't steal land that obviously. They don't do anything about it, but they do kind of give a warning like, that doesn't look good. Like, you're making us look bad here. Indian Reorganization Act, however, fixes this a little bit and repeals the Dawes Act, even though, of course, the effect of the Dawes Act are still in place. And it does like three important things. One of them is it supports the sort of Western model of democratically elected tribal councils. And this is good because then we sort of start having this more government to government relationship that we enjoy now. What's problematic about it, of course, is this is under a Western model of democracy and not one that was traditionally within various indigenous ways of leadership. Again, and then also part of this is going to be tribal constitutions, again, under a Western model. And then finally, the buying back of reservation trust land. So, which meant that the BIA, the Bureau of Indian Affairs, had funding to buy back reservation land that had been sold to settlers and then give it back to the tribes, all right? And then put it back into trust or reservation status. What's going to happen next? Over the next like 20 years, we're going to have World War II. And this is kind of a big deal for American Indians. We are well known for our service in the military. We are actually, in terms of a minority group, the largest serving minority group in the armed forces. But also this does a lot of things for us, just generally in terms of access after the war to education, but also the sort of global travel. A lot of natives start organizing together, right, across tribal affiliations. Sort of broadly, we know this as like the American Indian movement and other types of activism. Locally, we're going to know this as like the Fish Wars, right, which is a really big deal right now. And what I sort of, in my sort of small little space that I live in, assume that all of you have seen a ton of pictures of the Fish Wars and all this sort of stuff. It's probably not true. But what I'm trying to focus on here is, like, instead of showing a lot of those violent pictures, which are important and we should see them and stuff, also try to show like why did our leaders, why did our warriors do this kind of work, right? And, you know, like showing you pictures of my grandma. This is the Fife Reds, which was a native baseball team in Fife. A lot of these guys were part of the Fish Wars, either leaders or just like tangentially part of it. But, you know, a lot of why they did this work was to do this work, right? To be in their community, be with their family, to support them. So one of the little kids that I showed you with my grandma, my uncle, that's him right there. And then there's some other uncles I have here who are part of the Fife Reds. For those of you that are Native, I'm assuming you all have like great uncles and stuff that were part of Native baseball teams. This is a pretty cool normal thing. So as the Fish Wars were really ramping up, especially in the 1960s, what's going to happen is, you know, extreme pushback, you know, violent, both in terms of law, but actual physical violence from state game wardens, city of Tacoma police, and other state officials. And then, of course, like through law. And in May 1965, Judge John D. Cochran declares that the Puyallup tribe no longer exists because the reservation no longer exists. So all of this land loss, which was again mostly through swindle and unfair trading, now means that we no longer are a tribe, right, according to the court system. And this is despite the fact that 2 pieces of trust land were still held by the Puyallup, and several pieces of land which had fallen out of trust but were still owned by the Puyallup also existed. And of course, also really importantly, Pierce County has zero authority to declare that the Puyallup tribe doesn't exist. That's completely out of their jurisdiction. But if you think in terms of how power structures work and who has access to power, right, what they're doing is creating a legitimacy in order to enact further violence and to take away other sovereign rights, right? This is a, and they're very well aware of this. Let's see. A few years later, however, in 1967, the Washington State Supreme Court does say that the Puyallup tribe does exist, so they were relieved to find out that they were still in existence, I guess. Sorry. But however, did the reservation exist? That still remained undetermined, as did the question of whether set nets could be used. And this is a part of a series of law cases, Puyallup 1, Puyallup 2, Puyallup 3, which I'm not really going to go into because it's all very tedious. But more or less, these are all sort of minute ways that Washington State is trying to take away sovereignty and the sovereign right to fish, treaty fish from tribes, just like whether or not what kind of net could be used, how that net is used, all these just really tedious ways, again, to just sort of legitimize taking away these sovereign rights, right? This is all more or less illegal. So all of this builds up then until the fish wars and these battles to September 9th, 1970. This is the Battle of Tacoma, which, you know, just happened, I just always say like right over there, but it really, like, we could probably, like, if there's like a straight line, we would end up at the Battle of Tacoma, which was one of the last communally owned pieces of Puyallup land. So it was still owned by the Puyallup tribe as a communal property, and the other piece being the Puyallup Tribal Cemetery. During the summer, fish warriors, which a lot of the fish activism had actually happened down at Nisqually, but they all moved up to Tacoma, to this piece of land, really to draw media attention and to sort of work together in this way. Everybody was sort of expecting this battle to happen, and this morning, this day, you know, game wardens and local police violently attacked the Native activists who were there, and over 80 Native men, women, and children were arrested later that day. In response, 3 weeks later, the federal government's going to start US v. Washington, which is later going to be known as the Bolt decision, which is right now it's the 50th anniversary of the Bolt decision. Again, at the History Museum, there's a large, not large, medium-sized exhibit opposite the Medicine Creek Treaty. Should all check it out. Let's see here. So Bolt happens 4 years later. In the Bolt decision, there's also like a little bit where Bolt says the Puyallup Reservation exists, the tribe exists. Okay, great. This happens like every 5-10 years. And one of the things about the Bolt decision is that the retaliation against tribes and against Native fishers was actually more violent and more brutal and more outlandish than what had actually been happening before the Bolt decision. Basically Washington State refused to enact the Bolt decision, which is that 50% of the allowable catch goes to treaty tribes. It was so bad that the federal government had to step in and enforce the Bolt decision like 3 years later. In retaliation for this stepping in, what we then have is, again, Tacoma is going to work towards removing federal recognition again from the Puyallup tribe, and that is City of Tacoma v. Andrews, 1978. So I grew up with this story, which was that the city of Tacoma sued the federal government and said that the Puyallup tribe didn't exist because there's no land base. And this is a kind of a common trick that we see throughout the United States when they're trying to remove tribal recognition from tribes, which is they'll say something like, well, you don't have a land base anymore. And it's like, well, I wonder how that happened, right? Um, but we did have a land base. And let's see. Again, to go back to the Puyallup Reservation, to go back to my little spot. See. And to go back to Grandma Marge, that's her on the right. That's her cousin who also grew up on this land. Again, Grandma Marge, two of her cousins who also grew up on this land. So Grandma Marge, my Aunt Prudy, who grew up on the land, and my dad flew down to DC to testify that actually the Puyallup tribe had always existed because it had always existed on their land that they had always owned. There was three other tracts of land that had always been owned by Puyallup tribal members as well, and they also testified that this was the Puyallup tribe because of this land had always been with them. And in the ruling, the final tract and issue comprises about 1/3 of an acre. It was transferred. I don't know what that's transferred. United States by Marjorie Sterud and enrolled Puyallup to be held in trust for William. The tract has been in the Sterud family. Since its original allotment, and it is unclear how the land ever passed out of its trust status. So trust status is reservation status. What is clear is that the land was heavily encumbered and had often been on the verge of distress sale. William Sterud worked to pay off the liens, and the land was accepted into trust. On it stands only a dilapidated shack, which William hopes to convert into a decent home for his family. And so that's me. I'm 2 years old at this time. And what is missing from this necessarily short and sterile description is these attempts to restore land. The actors in these transactions are not wealthy individuals conniving ways to cheat the local government out of a tax dollar. They are not irresponsible illiterates creating disturbances and non-conforming structures in a downtown or industrial sector. They are self-respecting and, for that matter, self-denying people trying to preserve their tribe as a viable entity and to maintain themselves with a modicum of dignity and self-support. In one sense, this is irrelevant because the BIA seemingly does not particularize these human factors when it decides whether or not to accept trust responsibilities. In the more important sense, it is not. The Indian Reorganization Act was designed to assist tribes and enrolled members in just the circumstances here portrayed. So in 1934, when the Indian Reorganization Act was passed, it was to put land that had fallen out of trust right back into trust hands, and that's exactly what happened here. And so our land goes back into trust, and the Puyallup tribe is again declared to officially and still exist, as is the Puyallup Tribal Reservation land base. So then what this means for the Puyallup is that we're going to start having really almost like a rolling amount of rulings that are passed in our favor. This sort of the pushback because of Bolt from the city of Tacoma is going to, in fact, because of Andrews that they tried to fight, actually really revitalizes us and does all this sort of great work in making us it really backfired on Tacoma. Let's see. Next, we have the armed takeover of Cascadia. There's 2 armed takeovers. This is the second one led by my dad in 1980. This will result in the transfer of title of Cascadia or the Cushman building to the Puyallup tribe. That is where the casino is now. So we take that land back. We literally take it back. Next, in 1981, we're going to sue for this part of the Port of Tacoma riverbed that was part of our agreement from the executive order of 1857. The question is whether the United States conveyed beneficial ownership of the Puyallup riverbed within the exterior boundaries of the Puyallup Reservation to the Puyallup Indians by the treaties of 1854 and 1855 and the executive order of January 20th, 1857, and therefore continues to hold the land in trust for the use and benefit of the tribe, or whether the United States retained ownership of the riverbed as public land, which then passed to the state of Washington upon its admission to the Union. And he determined that the port has no deed or other document reflecting ownership of the property and does not base its claim on any documentary chain of title. So it belongs to the Puyallup tribe. The port of Tacoma is going to say, like, we're going to go back to court, and it's going to be reaffirmed again that this belongs to the Puyallup tribe. This here, like right over my grandma's face. That's okay.
No good place.
My grandma would find that hysterical. So again, this is my grandma in the red. That's my Uncle Joe in the black, and he was the one who was the little baby who then was on the Fife Reds. That's my great uncle Don Matheson, who is one of the fish war leaders, as well as chairman of the Puyallup tribe at certain times. And also on the Fife Reds, and that was my Aunt Prudy, great Aunt Prudy. These are all brothers and sisters who also went to Washington D.C. with my grandma to argue that that the Puyallup tribe existed because it always existed on their land. Let's see, I'm on my own for the rest of these. All of which is going to then culminate in the Puyallup tribal land settlement of 1990, which is again, after really this like 10 years of court battles, I guess it's like 15 post-Bolt, the Puyallup tribe is going to show from those illegal land transfers from in the early 1900s that actually that those titles were transferred illegally, and we could sue each individual land and get those back, or we could do a large agreement with the city, state, and federal government, and that's what we did. At the time, this was the largest settlement with American Indian tribe, and really opened up this precedent for American Indian tribes to resettle. It's more or less like a renegotiation of our treaty rights. This is the night of the Puyallup tribal land settlement. So again, that's my great Aunt Prudy. That's my Aunt Patty in the back there, whose allotment was right next to ours. That's my dad in the middle wearing a UW t-shirt. He loves the UW. And then that's my great grandma Marie, whose allotment was on the opposite side of Aunt Patty's. They're at Harbor Lights. I think that's like where like a lot of big political stuff used to happen in the 90s. So in conclusion, did I go too fast? Am I okay? Okay. One of the things, so my dad tells me the story, and when my dad asked me to do this work or told me to do this work, he always calls it Andrew v. City of Tacoma. And when I was trying to figure that out and why, of course, now I realize, of course, that's how he sees it, right? Is that this wasn't the city of Tacoma, suing us and fighting us, right? It was us advocating and saying like these are our rights. This was Andrews versus the city of Tacoma, and I think it was, right? And finally, here we all are. Here's my dad and my three sisters on our land, all of the kids, except there's now another baby that would go at the bottom there. My sister, who's next to my dad there, she still lives on our land with my dad, who also has a house there. We're pretty female heavy family. It's like two dudes, and there's my kids right there. Yeah, and Bud, though, is one dude, right? Yeah. And so yeah, that's my talk. Show that, I guess one thing I would like to say is I think that this story is really unique, and I think it's really important. I think it's really special. But I also think that all Native families have these stories, right? Of the ways that their family, in big and little ways, were part of these large movements of resistance, right? They had aunties or moms who like were cooking the food for the fish warriors. They had uncles who were leaders, and they had people who were pushing the paperwork and doing the everyday drudge of keeping their tribe and feeding their elders and keeping the people together. And and uh and I just hope that we have room for these stories. So thank you.
All right, we'll give our speaker just a short break, and anybody who did not get a raffle ticket, please hold up your hand so I can get you something.
Thanks so much.
All right. We have so in case you're wondering what they're winning, so we give away swag, like I mentioned before. So that's our logo. So wear it proudly. Tell people about this event. So we're giving away toques at the moment, or ski hats. I don't know what else they're called around different places. Toboggans, where I come from. That's what we call these. So we have 2 of these to give away. Here's our numbers. 137. Oh shit. Yeah, old. That's right. It's the dim lighting. 0965. We got a winner. Hey, come on down. Excellent. Yay. Come on. Just because you didn't win. Here we go. Thank you. All right. Second winner is last 4 digits 0973. 0973. All right. All right. Thank you all for coming. Just to let you know, excuse me, again, second Tuesday of each month, March 12th, we're going to hear about a disappearing donut in the Alaska tundra, which I'm fascinated about. I don't really know what it's about, and I know the guy. So definitely come and check it out. A friend of mine, Joel, up at UW in Seattle, who does work on permafrost up there. So he's going to talk about climate change issues and how that's causing drastic changes in the tundra. So hopefully you'll come out for that. And then our talk in April, I don't have the title yet, but I have a friend of mine from Microsoft who's going to come and talk about some of the cool things that she's been working on, which are actually trying to deal with ableism, kind of creating technology that helps disabled folks. So it'll be a really cool talk in April as well. So hopefully you'll come out to see us. So without further ado, we'll call our speaker up here one more time and we'll field questions from you folks.
Oh, exciting. Yeah. Oh, so she asked, I guess you're asking how are the people picked to go to DC? Um, I guess it would, I mean, I suppose so. These, those were elders, so they have priority. But I do think, like, I think about that trip a lot, like, because I think it must have been the only time that my grandma and my great aunt Prudy were on a plane. Like it was a really big deal. And yeah, so I guess I do imagine the trip quite frequently, right? Because it would have just sort of how like kind of fabulous that must have been, right? As you can see, they were like kind of fabulous women, right? They were it was a great time according to my dad. Yes. Anyone else? Oh, Ruby? What's that, honey? Well, the fish wars started, that's a great question. And the fish wars started mostly because we were always fishing to support ourselves, both just because that's what we ate with salmon, but also culturally, it's the sort of salmon are our ancestors. We believe that, and they're our relatives, and they're part of our ceremonies and all these sort of ways. But mostly it's because of the overfishing and canneries of settlers, and that depleted our runs so significantly that that instead of conservation against the canneries and the overfishing, they tried to take fishing away from the few hundred native peoples that were actually actively fishing. And so in response, we kept fishing. And much to, literally, like, those native fishers, their lives were on the line. They were violently harassed and jailed constantly for that. So they did it in order to support their families and their people. Yes. Yes. Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. Yes, I know. So what she's referring to, this was like during LNG, right? Where some protesters were arrested in support of LNG, or in support of not LNG, I guess, anti-LNG activists, and they were charged with trespassing and shenanigans, I suppose. And in the end, they were not arrested or not charged because it's like officially was like Puyallup preservation land. I yes, I will. Whether or not I think that I mean, it's all Puyallup land, right? um, whether or not how it exactly works at the Port of Tacoma, I will just say officially that all of that belongs to us. Yes, bud. Pardon? The Gordon guy? I don't know what you mean. Anybody else? Oh yeah. Yeah, the Puyallup tribal land settlement. I mean, everything is always like, um, in terms like broadly, right? It was in 1871 that the United States officially ended treaty making with Native tribes, right? That was like in the, I don't know, Appropriations Act, um, which is sort of misleading because basically what would happen from then on is that renegotiations would happen through executive orders or happen through settlements or happen through agreements, right? So, so while you could say that like officially that's sort of a settlement and that's sort of the end of that story, that's not true. We're constantly in negotiations and rediscussing processes and different rights and how those are going to be um I guess enacted. So no, and again that's broadly for all Native tribes in the United States. That makes sense.
So I was curious, in 1990 was the last thing you talked about.
Mhm.
That's just when Tacoma gets started.
Yeah, this is our land too.
So, so I was wondering sort of what role, right, sort of a relationship that's happened between UW and the tribe.
You know, I have some opinions on this, don't you, Jim? Well, it's interesting, I would say, because with the founding of UW Tacoma, my dad, who's the chairman of the Puyallup tribe now and was at the time, or in, I don't know what his exact council role was at the time, but he was part of the groundbreaking ceremony. And so part of the, I don't know, he had a shovel or cut a ribbon or whatever they do. And then what's interesting, or I think important in terms of, again, a lot of what I'm talking about here, which is that Tacoma has gone out of its way to de-recognize, right, the Puyallup tribe. And the next time that they make in UW Tacoma does not make a full-time American Indian hire until 28 years later, and that's me. So they certainly knew the Puyallup tribe was there, and they don't do anything to create Native presence on the campus until really the faculty sort of demand this. I have more I could say, but we can talk about that later. Yes. Yes. So my grandma was uh, her first language is Lushootseed, was Lushootseed. She died when I was about in second grade. But her first language was Lushootseed, and we were told, and this was a normal thing that is told throughout the now United States, is that if you teach, if you use the language in your home, they'll take your children away. And there's actually, I've gone through all the laws. I can't find any that actually say that explicitly. They don't really need an excuse to take their children. They took the children all the time. And so by the time my dad is a person comes into the world, he probably has like about a dozen words in Lushootseed. So my grandma made a very conscious choice to not speak her native language to her children. She will go to Chemois, which is most of the Puyallups will end up at Chemois. Very sort of amazingly, when she goes to Chemois, that's the boarding school in Oregon. She's gonna start a tribal council at the school and be the vice chair of the council there until she moves back. So yeah. Um, yeah, I mean, I think a, the a, a lot of us Native faculty are always trying to do what we can. The number one way that you recruit and retain Native and Indigenous students is, anybody know? It's hiring Native and Indigenous faculty. So if students want to make more demands in that sort of area, we could certainly use more Native and Indigenous faculty at UWT. Jeremy? Yes. Yeah, I mean, I think, broadly, every tribe is going to be different. I think every tribe wants either is either trying to buy back more land or claim more land, and then further sort of self-determination in those ways. Uh, the problem is once, and this is complicated, but still stemming from this Indian Reorganization Act, is buying back that land and then having it put back into trust. And that trust process, the US government is very against putting land back into trust, which again is reservation status. And though it still happens, but there's so many blocks in that. Yeah. Cassie. Yeah, I mean, I think you know the answer to this also. But like I said, this whole grammar bit really is like 2 paragraphs in the larger work, which is about Andrews v. Tacoma, city of Tacoma v. Andrews. And then and that is, I wouldn't say done, but a large part of it is. And then I think that would be like half. And then the other half of the project will be on the Puyallup tribal land settlement, which is, like I said, historic on national levels. And of course, obviously for the Puyallup, but isn't really that discussed that much these days or in academia.
Tacoma ever publicly acknowledged what he's working?
Oh, not that I mean, I've heard, like with when the Fish Wars Bridge went up, like they were like, we did this bridge because we were, we weren't great, but it's, it's really like they were really not great, right? The city of Tacoma was, actively, destroying my people, right? Over 100 years, right? The city of Tacoma exists. City of Tacoma is an urban center because this was a indigenous urban center, right? This is where all of the Native peoples would come in their canoes from various places and like stop and be here, right? Tacoma didn't create itself an urban center. They took over one, right? And now I'm just mad, but I don't even know what the question was. Yes. I mean, I know a teeny little bit, mostly in one of the so we sort of historically and culturally, we were people who we longhoused in the winters, right? And then in the spring and summers, we traveled in smaller groups, usually like in our family clans. And we would go to like our sort of family traditional clan fishing spots or gathering spots and this sort of thing. And then what happens once we're sort of forced onto reservations is that we still do that. And one of the things that we really quickly adapted to, really in like the 1890s and later, is that we became like, we would do day labor for hop fields and stuff, because it really worked with our sort of the way we kind of had historically always lived our lives. Like we like to do this sort of work in the summers, in the spring, and then we'd come back to the reservation. It's what's fun about it for my work is that reading all the letters from the reservation agents. So there would be people who lived on the res, federal officials who lived on the res and would, dictate how natives lived, right? And all of the letters at this time were basically like, now they've left again, like, because they're trying to keep them on the res, right? Keep us imprisoned, really, right? So that's really all most of my knowledge is that, they go over to the hop farms and do a lot of the work for the hop farming. Yeah. Thank you. What keeps you excited? Yeah, I mean, like those three right there. So yeah, just I would say that how I grew up and what I see now is something unlike I could ever have thought that we would have language. That when I was when the Puyallup tribal land settlement, maybe a year or two before that, is when they started putting up signs around Tacoma and Fife that would say you're now entering the Fife reservation. Like that was, people like lost their minds. Like there was like violent acts because those signs went up. I remember being very worried and very scared. And that now like my kids can like learn Lashutseed and like can do their dances and stuff, and is unbelievable to me. And that is like 100% in credit to like those my elders that I just showed you, who did the work and always did the work with so little payoff, or just because they loved their families and their people so much. Like again, I know like what a lot of you see is like this fancy casinos and all our cool culture and all the great stuff that the Puyallup tribe is doing today, and they were always doing that work, but against like absolute violence and discrimination, and it's unbelievable what we owe them. Yeah, Ruby. All right, we'll talk later. Okay.
All right. Thank our speaker one more time. Thank you all for coming. If you don't mind, as you're cleaning up, if you could, we have to clean up the back room. So if you can put any glasses and stuff, there should be a tub back there. And then you can return your baskets and stuff to the where you picked up the food and dump your stuff in the trash. Otherwise, that would be great. Saves me some of the cleanup. But thank you all for coming. Hope to see you in March. And thanks again for our wonderful speaker.